It was one of those evenings when everything inside the hotel felt louder than usual. The voices of guests blended with the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of conversation, and the constant shuffle of shoes on polished floors. The chandeliers hanging from the tall ceiling glowed warmly, giving the entire hall a golden shine. Workers moved quickly between tables, carrying trays filled with drinks and small plates, trying their best to keep the wealthy guests satisfied. In the middle of all this, Lena worked quietly, staying focused on her job and avoiding any attention. She had learned long ago that staying invisible made things easier. As a waitress at this luxury hotel, she had grown used to the way people looked at her, or didn't look at her at all. Most guests treated her like part of the decor, someone who existed only to refill glasses and smile politely. She didn't mind it too much. It was a job, and it paid her bills. But still, there were moments when the weight of being unnoticed pressed on her heart. Tonight was a special event, one of the biggest of the season. A charity gala attended by business owners, politicians, and people whose clothes alone could pay her rent for months. Everyone spoke in confident tones, laughing loudly, shaking hands, and taking photos as if they lived in a world far beyond her reach. Lena moved around the hall with a calm expression, balancing her tray effortlessly, even though her feet ached from hours of standing. The event staff had been preparing for days. The decorations were carefully arranged, the flowers imported, the food checked and double-checked by chefs. Even the music was supposed to be perfect. A skilled pianist had been hired to perform soft background music throughout the evening, creating the elegant atmosphere the organizers wanted. Lena remembered seeing the glossy black grand piano earlier when she passed by the stage. Just looking at it made something spark inside her chest, something warm and painful at the same time. She didn't dare go near it. Not today. Not ever. As she weaved through the crowd, offering drinks with her usual gentle voice, she heard bits of conversations talk of investments, vacations, new cars, and luxury items. Nothing in these conversations felt familiar to her life, but she listened with a polite smile anyway. Her world was different, smaller, but she carried it quietly. While placing empty glasses on her tray, she noticed the event manager standing near the stage, talking rapidly on his phone. His expression was sharp, eyebrows pulled tight. He paced back and forth as if something had gone terribly wrong. Lena didn't mean to eavesdrop, but she caught a few scattered words. "What do you mean you can't make it?" "We need someone now. The guests will be furious if there's no music." She slowed down, trying not to make it obvious she was listening. A few seconds later, the manager ended the call with a frustrated sigh and rubbed his forehead. He looked around the hall as if searching for a solution, but nothing came to his eyes. Lena continued working, placing new glasses on a table and making sure the napkins were aligned. But curiosity tugged at her. She glanced again toward the stage, where two other staff members had now joined the manager. Their conversation looked intense. "It's a disaster," one whispered. "How do you lose a pianist at the last minute?" Another added. The manager shook his head. "He got sick. Very sick. He can't play tonight. And I don't have a backup. This piano wasn't cheap to bring in. We need someone to play anything. Guests are already asking when the music will start." Lena felt a small flutter in her stomach. She tried to push the thought away, but it returned again. She looked at the grand piano. Its surface reflected the lights perfectly, and the keys looked untouched, waiting. She swallowed. No, she couldn't. Not here. Not in front of so many people. She took a deep breath and continued serving the guests. But memories slipped into her mind like soft echoes. Her childhood room. The old upright piano her father once bought. The long afternoons practicing until her fingers hurt. The simple pride she felt when she played for her family. Those days felt distant now, almost like they belonged to someone else. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Life had taken her in a different direction, one filled with bills, responsibilities, and choices that left little space for dreams. But that didn't mean the dream had died. It lived quietly inside her. Even if she tried to ignore it, as she passed the stage again, she heard the manager sigh loudly. "We just need someone who knows basic keys. Even simple music would work. Anything is better than silence." One of the staff members joked, "Maybe one of us should learn the piano in the next 10 minutes. They all laughed tiredly. Then someone said casually, "Maybe one of the servers knows how to play?" It was meant as a joke. But those words hit Lena like a spark. She froze for a moment, her heart pounding. Should she say something? Should she step forward? Her throat felt tight. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the tray. What if she embarrassed herself? What if they laughed? What if she ruined the event? The guests were not ordinary people. They were sharp, critical, and used to the best. She was just a waitress trying to get through her shift. But deep inside her, something whispered quietly, "You can do this." She took a slow breath, trying to calm the heavy beating of her heart. Her feet felt heavy as she took a small step toward the stage. Then another. She didn't know why she was doing it. She didn't know if it was courage or foolishness guiding her. All she knew was that she couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. The manager noticed her standing nearby and gave a tired smile. "Everything okay?" he asked. Lena forced out a small voice. I can play a little." He blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" She looked at the piano, then back at him. "I know how to play. Not professionally, but if you really need someone, I can try." The other staff members looked at each other with raised eyebrows. One even chuckled. "You? Play the piano?" Lena nodded slowly, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, I used to play before. I can try something simple." The manager sighed again, rubbing his forehead. "Honestly, at this point, anything will help. Just play something soft. Calm background music. That's all we need." Her chest tightened. It was happening. She was actually going to sit at the piano again after so many years. "Okay," she whispered. She placed her tray on a nearby table and wiped her palms on her apron to steady herself. Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier, as if the entire hall was watching her, even though no one had noticed yet. The bright lights above reflected off the polished surface as she approached. When she reached the bench, she paused. She could almost see her younger self, in her mind hopeful, determined, full of dreams. Slowly, she sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. The touch of the smooth keys sent a shiver through her. It had been so long. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Behind her, staff members whispered quietly. The manager stood with folded arms, watching with a mixture of doubt and desperation. Lena placed her fingers gently on the key's dot, and for the first time in years, she pressed down. The moment the manager asked her to sit at the piano, she felt her whole body become stiff. She had spent the entire evening carrying trays, refilling glasses, and walking from table to table with a polite smile. Her feet were already tired, and her mind was focused on finishing the shift without any mistakes. She never imagined she would be told to walk across the grand hall and sit at a piano in front of people who barely noticed her until now. She stood there for a moment, unsure if she had even heard him correctly. Maybe he said it out of frustration, or maybe he simply didn't believe she could play. But he repeated it again, this time sounding more urgent. There was no music, and the guests were growing restless. Conversations were getting louder, and some guests were already complaining about the dull atmosphere. She could see the worry on the manager's face as he rubbed his forehead. and she understood that he was desperate for anything that could help. She kept staring at the piano from a distance. It looked too elegant, too perfect, too expensive. The polished black surface reflected the golden lights hanging from the ceiling. Its presence alone made the room feel more luxurious. She remembered the last time she had touched a piano that looked anything like this. She had been younger then, full of hope, unaware of how quickly life could change. Back then, the piano wasn't frightening. It had been her escape, the place where she poured out everything she felt and everything she dreamed of becoming. But now, after years of not playing, the thought of touching the keys again made her heart pound. One of the senior staff members nudged her lightly and whispered, "Go on. Just try. They won't know the difference." He didn't say it to be rude. He just didn't expect anything remarkable from her. To them, she was the quiet waitress who always showed up on time, worked hard, and never caused trouble. No one here knew that she had spent years practicing scales until her fingers felt like they could move on their own. No one knew that she once wanted to perform on big stages. And maybe that was why she hesitated. What if she tried and failed? What if the years had made her rusty? What if she embarrassed herself in front of hundreds of people? But another part of her whispered something different. Maybe this was the moment she had been waiting for. Maybe the chance she never asked for was finally standing right in front of her. Her hands shook slightly as she placed the tray down on the serving table. She took a deep breath and slowly walked forward. The path to the piano felt longer than it should. She could feel eyes turning toward her, curious but not confident. A few guests looked at her with small smiles, as if they were amused. They assumed she would tap the keys awkwardly and offer nothing more than background. Noised-out her coworkers watched from the side of the hall. Some of them exchanged looks of disbelief. Others whispered softly, wondering if she really knew how to play or if she was just trying to help the manager avoid more complaints. She didn't blame them. She rarely talked about herself. She never mentioned her past. The only thing anyone knew about her was that she worked hard, stayed quiet, and sometimes hummed softly when she thought no one was listening. When she reached the piano, she paused again. She gently ran her fingers along the edge of the instrument, feeling the smoothness of the wood. It brought back memories, sitting in a small classroom, her teacher correcting her posture, the warm sound of the old piano at home, evenings spent practicing one song over and over. Her chest tightened with emotion. She looked around the hall once more. Everyone was waiting. She sat down slowly on the bench, careful not to make any noise. Her knees felt weak. She placed her hands on her lap and took another breath. Then she lifted her fingers and let them hover above the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. The silence stretched, and she could hear her own heartbeat. She wondered again if she should back out. She could still get up, apologize, and return to her work. But something inside her refused to let her walk away. She pressed the first key. The note rang out softly, clear and warm. It echoed through the hall, and she felt a small wave of calm wash over her. She tried another note, then another. Her fingers remembered more than she expected. The sound felt comforting, familiar, as if she had never stepped away from the instrument. Someone in the crowd let out a small chuckle, thinking it was just a simple warm-up. A few others whispered among themselves, waiting to see what would happen. She heard all of it, but she didn't let herself get distracted. She closed her eyes for a second and reminded herself of the songs she used to love. She thought about the melodies she played when no one was around. Melodies that always helped her find peace. She began playing a slow, gentle tune, something soft and easy, something that would let her settle her nerves. Her fingers moved carefully, not rushing, allowing each note to fill the space around her. She could feel the attention of the room beginning to shift. The whispers softened. The amused expressions slowly faded. People leaned slightly forward in their chairs. As she continued, she felt her confidence grow. The keys responded to her touch the same way they always had. She could sense the familiar rhythm in her hands. She felt her shoulders loosen. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't just a waitress running from one table to another. She was someone who knew how to create something beautiful. Her coworkers watched with surprise, their expressions changing with every passing second. They weren't expecting this. None of them had ever seen this side of her. Even the manager stood still, his frustration replaced by curiosity. He rubbed his chin, trying to understand how he had missed something like this about someone who worked for him. The guests started paying closer attention. A few of them lowered their glasses. Some stopped mid-conversation, turning their bodies toward the piano. They weren't fully impressed yet, but something was happening that they couldn't ignore. The soft, steady music was creating a shift in the atmosphere. She opened her eyes and glanced briefly at the crowd. Seeing their growing interest gave her a quiet strength. She decided to take a small risk. She transitioned into another piece, slightly more complex, with richer tones and smoother transitions. The sound grew fuller, more expressive. She put her emotions into the keys, letting the music speak for her in ways she couldn't do with words. The room responded again. People who had ignored her earlier now watched her closely. Some leaned back in their chairs, surprised. Others exchanged looks that said, "Wait, this is actually good." The small chuckles from earlier had disappeared completely. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest. She remembered how much she missed this. She remembered the joy she felt when she played freely, without fear. She remembered dreams she had pushed aside for years. Sitting there, she felt like a part of herself was waking up again. She played with more feeling. Her fingers moved with a confidence that she hadn't felt in a long time. The melody flowed naturally, and even the smallest notes carried emotion. She didn't think about the guests anymore. She didn't think about the luxury hall or the expensive decorations. For a moment, she forgot she was even at work. She was lost in the music, and the music was bringing her back to life. A few guests began whispering to one another. But this time, their whispers weren't amused. They were surprised. Some asked each other if she was a trained pianist. Others wondered how someone with this talent ended up serving tables at a luxury event. One guest even put down his phone, choosing to listen instead of scroll. Her coworkers exchanged wide-eyed glances. One of them covered their mouth in shock. Another nudged the person beside them, pointing toward her as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The manager stood straighter, no longer anxious. The tension that had filled him earlier started to fade. He wasn't just relieved, he was impressed. The room, which had been loud and restless just minutes ago, was now calm and focused. She finished the piece softly, letting the final notes fade naturally. For a brief moment, the room stayed silent. She looked up, unsure how people would react. Then she saw something she didn't expect. They weren't just looking at her, they were waiting for more. That silent moment was all she needed to understand that everything had changed. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. She sat still for a moment, letting her breath steady as the last notes faded into the air. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, and she could feel a soft warmth in her fingertips, the kind that came only after playing something from the heart. The room had shifted. She felt it even before she lifted her head. Moments ago, the crowd was restless, bored, and searching for entertainment. Now, they were quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comes from disinterest. This was the kind of silence that held attention, the kind born from people realizing they were witnessing something unexpected. She slowly looked up. Her eyes moved across the hall, and she found dozens of faces turned toward her. These were people who rarely paid attention to the serving staff. Most of the night, She had walked past their tables unnoticed. Now their eyes were fixed on her. Their expressions had changed, no longer amused or doubtful, but curious, surprised, even impressed. A soft wave of nervousness ran through her, but it faded as quickly as it came. She had already made it this far. She took a small breath and placed her hands back on the keys. A few guests adjusted their seats, leaning forward as if preparing to listen carefully. Others lowered their champagne flutes, wanting both hands free, as though they didn't want anything to distract them from what came next. She thought for a moment about what to play. She had gone through a gentle, simple piece to warm herself up. But now she felt something different inside her, something bold, something stronger. She wanted to tell a story with the music. She wanted to show them not just that she could play, but what the piano meant to her. Her fingers began moving again, this time into a more complex melody, one filled with emotion and depth. The notes carried a quiet sadness in the beginning, not heavy or dramatic, but honest like the sound of distant memories. As she played, she felt herself slipping into the familiar world that only music could create for her. The keys were no longer intimidating. They felt like old friends she had missed for years. Each note traveled across the hall, touching every corner of the room. The guests who had been chatting before fell silent. A waiter carrying a tray paused near the door, watching her instead of continuing toward his table. Even the hotel staff behind the service counter peeked out to see what was happening. She didn't look up this time. She didn't need to. She could feel the atmosphere around her, changing with every passing second. The room had become still, not stiff or uncomfortable, but peacefully focused. It was the kind of stillness that only music could create. As she moved into the middle part of the piece, her playing grew stronger. Her fingers flowed across the keys, sometimes slow and delicate, sometimes fast and expressive. She let the emotions guide her movements. The melody rose gently, carrying traces of hope and determination. It wasn't a grand or dramatic performance meant to impress big crowds. It was personal, filled with pieces of her past, the struggles she faced, the dreams she had once lived for, and the part of herself she had buried to keep going. Some guests exchanged thoughtful glances. One woman placed her hand on her chest, touched by the unexpected beauty of the music. An older gentleman leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed in admiration, as though analyzing her technique. A young couple stopped whispering, their attention fixed solely on her. Her coworker stood near the wall, watching with a sense of shock that still hadn't fully lifted. They knew she was quiet, kind, and hardworking, but none of them had imagined this. A few whispered to each other, but their whispers were filled with excitement, not judgment. The manager, who had earlier been pacing around with stress, now stood frozen. His arms were crossed loosely, and his expression was one of disbelief. In all his years of running events, he had never seen something like this. He had hired pianists, singers, and performers for gatherings far smaller than this gala, yet none had managed to silence a room of wealthy guests so quickly. The music grew more intense. The melody spread through the hall like a wave, rising and falling with emotion. Her hands moved faster, more confidently. Every stroke of the keys felt purposeful. Every sound carried her feelings in ways she could never express through speaking. She remembered sitting in her childhood home, playing the same piece while her mother cooked in the next room. She remembered the pride in her teacher's voice when she mastered a difficult part. She remembered the afternoons spent practicing until sunset, the keys warm under her fingertips, the dreams that filled her chest back then. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel all of it again. She reached the final part of the piece, where the melody softened into something warm and comforting. The notes floated gently, like a warm breeze brushing past. She could feel the crowd leaning in emotionally, even if no one made a sound. The music created a bridge between her past and her present, between her heart and the people listening. As she approached the last few seconds, the room felt even quieter than before. The final notes drifted softly, fading slowly as if they didn't want to leave. When the last sound finally dissolved, there was a moment, a small, delicate pause where no one moved. Then something happened that made her chest tighten. Few people clapped softly at first. The sound was gentle, almost cautious, as if they were afraid to break the fragile beauty of the moment. But then others joined in. The applause grew louder, building steadily until it filled the hall. It wasn't a sudden burst of noise. It was a warm wave of appreciation spreading throughout the room. She blinked, taken by surprise. Her hands rested on her lap, and she stared at the keys, unsure how to react. She had expected polite applause, at most maybe a few kind nods. Instead, she found herself receiving genuine recognition. And it didn't stop there. The applause continued. Not overly dramatic, not exaggerated, but heartfelt. People were smiling, nodding, whispering to one another in amazement. Some guests even looked around as if trying to understand how a quiet waitress had created such an unforgettable moment. One guest near the front spoke softly to the person beside them. "She plays like someone trained by a real master," they said, sounding impressed. Another guest shook their head slightly, still astonished. "Where did she come from? How does someone with that much talent end up serving tables?" She felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know where to look. The attention she was getting didn't feel uncomfortable, but it did feel unbelievable. After years of hiding this part of herself, she was finally being seen. Her coworkers had no words at first. They simply stared at her with wide eyes. Then one of them smiled proudly, nudging the person next to them. Another gave a small cheer before covering their mouth. The staff, who had always known her as the quiet and soft-spoken one, now saw her in a completely new light. The manager stepped forward slowly, still clapping. His face had changed from surprise to admiration. He didn't know her story, but he knew talent when he saw it. He approached her with a mixture of disbelief and respect. "You? You didn't tell us you could do that," he said quietly once the applause began to settle. His voice was soft, almost unsure. She looked down shyly. "I haven't played like this in a long time," she answered. Before she could say anything else, someone from the crowd called out, "Play another." A few others joined in. "Yes, one more. Please continue." That was beautiful. The requests came with excitement, not pressure. These people weren't demanding something from her. They genuinely wanted to hear more. She looked at the piano once again. Her heart felt full, nervous yet happy. A part of her wondered if she truly had the strength to play more in front of all these people. But another part, a deeper part, knew that this moment was special. It wasn't something that came often in life. She nodded softly, without saying a word. She placed her hands back on the keys. This time, she didn't think about fear or expectations. She didn't worry about what people might say. She simply thought about what she loved most, the music itself. She started playing again, letting the notes speak for her. And just like that, the room fell into another silence, ready to hear the next piece of her story. She took a slow breath as she let her fingers settle on the keys once more. The hall had quieted down, but the air still felt charged with the excitement of the moment. She could feel the room waiting, every pair of eyes fixed on her with a kind of curiosity she wasn't used to. A moment ago, she had been just another member of the staff. Now, the entire event seemed to revolve around her. She let her fingers move gently at first. A soft melody drifted through the hall, almost like a whisper. The sound was delicate, warm, and carried a sense of calm that washed over the people listening. It wasn't just music, it was emotion, shaped into sound. The guests leaned back in their seats, some closing their eyes, others resting their hands on the table as they sank into the peaceful rhythm. As she played, her mind wandered through memories she had tucked away for years. She remembered sitting in her small room late at night, practicing in secret when she didn't want anyone to hear how emotional her playing became. She remembered how music used to be the place where she felt free, where she didn't have to worry about anything except the next note. For a long time, life had forced her to step away from it. But now, as she sat at the beautiful grand piano, she felt all those lost pieces of herself returning. The gentle melody slowly shifted into something richer. The notes grew deeper, fuller, like a story unfolding. She didn't think about what she was playing. She simply let her hands follow the emotions rising inside her. Her fingers glided over the keys with ease, but also with purpose, as though she were telling everyone in the room the things she never said aloud. The guests felt the change too. Conversations had disappeared completely. The room was so quiet that the soft clicking of the chandelier lights could be heard between the notes. People weren't just listening, they were absorbing every sound, letting the music guide their feelings. Near the front, a couple held hands as they watched her. An older woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin, touched by something in the melody. A group of friends who had been laughing loudly earlier now sat quietly, leaning toward the piano as though drawn by an invisible thread. Even the staff, who were supposed to continue their tasks, found themselves frozen at the edges of the room. A waiter stood holding a tray with empty glasses, completely forgetting where he was supposed to deliver them. Another leaned against a pillar, smiling softly as she listened. It was rare for moments like this to happen during work, and they knew they were witnessing something unforgettable. The manager, who usually stayed busy during events, found himself standing near the middle of the hall, not moving. His arms were uncrossed now, and his face had softened. There was no frustration left, only respect. He knew he had stumbled upon something rare, something he never expected. As the melody grew stronger, she felt her heart open even more. The music shifted into a part that carried hope-like, bright notes that lifted the atmosphere higher. She played as though she could breathe again, as though every piece of her that had been hidden under responsibilities was finally stepping into the light. She glanced around briefly, while her fingers continued to move. The expressions in the room gave her courage. For the first time, she had an audience that saw her not as a waitress holding a tray, but as someone with something to offer. She turned her focus back to the keys, losing herself once again in the sound. Her fingers moved gracefully, weaving through the piece with a natural flow. Her posture relaxed. Her shoulders softened. She let the music fill her completely. The melody took on another shift, this time moving into a softer, more emotional place. It wasn't sad, it was tender, reflective. The kind of sound that made people think about their own memories, their own quiet moments of life. The hall seemed to breathe in sync with the music. As she played, she thought about the long days she spent serving drinks and carrying plates. She thought about how she had convinced herself that playing piano was just something in her past. Tonight proved that it was still a part of her, alive and untouched. Her hands moved with precision, but also with a softness that made the music feel alive. She played with honesty, without trying to impress, without trying to prove anything. She simply expressed what was in her heart. People watching her could feel it. There was something raw in her music, something genuine. That was why the hall stayed so silent. It wasn't just skill, it was emotion they felt. A man in the second row tilted his head, noticing how her eyes softened when she played certain parts. He whispered to his friend, "She's not performing. She's feeling it." His friend nodded, unable to look away. As she moved into the final third of the piece, the music took a brighter turn once more. It began to rise with energy, like the first light of a sunrise. There was hope in the sound, hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. It was as if each note helped her remember her worth, her strength, her dreams. Her confidence grew with every passing second. She didn't need applause or recognition to feel complete in that moment. The music itself was enough. It felt like breathing fresh air after being stuck in a small space. It felt like finally stepping out into the world after hiding from it. For too long, her coworkers felt pride swell in their chests as they watched her. They had worked with her for months, even years, but they had never seen her smile the way she smiled, now not with her lips, but with her whole presence. One of them whispered, "I can't believe we never knew." The manager, still amazed, leaned slightly forward. He wasn't thinking about schedules, tasks, or responsibilities. He was simply witnessing something rare, a moment that would stay with him for years. The guests were fully immersed. A few held their hands clasped gently in front of them. Others rested their arms on the table, leaning in to catch every detail. Not a single person was distracted. No phones out, no side chatter. It was as if time had slowed down inside that bright, luxurious hall. Her fingers danced lightly across the keys as she moved toward the final section of the piece. The notes began to slow, settling into a peaceful rhythm once again. The music softened into something delicate, almost fragile, as though she were laying her heart before them with each sound. She let the last note ring out softly, letting it linger in the air. This time, she held her hands above the keys a moment longer, as though savoring the final breath of the melody. When she finally lowered her hands to her lap, she felt her chest rise and fall with fresh emotion. The silence that followed was powerful. The entire room seemed suspended in the moment, like everyone needed a breath before reacting. Then the applause came. It started stronger than before, with no hesitation. Hands clapped loudly, with genuine excitement. Some guests even stood from their chairs, moved by what they had just heard. Others whistled softly or called out words like, "Beautiful." She looked up, surprised by the intensity of their reaction. She felt almost overwhelmed, but in a good way. The sound of applause wrapped around her, warm and supportive. She wasn't used to this kind of recognition. For a long time, life had taught her to stay quiet, to work hard, to disappear into the background. But now, people were celebrating her. She glanced toward the staff area. Her coworkers were clapping with huge smiles, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One of them gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up. The waiter who had paused with a tray earlier now placed it down and clapped with both hands. Even the manager couldn't hide his amazement. He nodded at her with a proud smile, something she had never seen from him before. A few guests from the nearest tables whispered excitedly among themselves. "She has real talent," one said. "This girl should be performing somewhere bigger," another added. A third person commented, "Imagine if she had never played tonight. We would have never known." She felt her throat tighten slightly. The attention was overwhelming, but it also filled her with warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. A soft voice from the crowd called out, "One more, please." Then another guest repeated it. "Yes, please play again." Voices from different corners of the hall joined in. Some clapped rhythmically as a request. Others smiled encouragingly. She took in the moment slowly. Her heart raced, but she didn't feel fear anymore. She felt a quiet strength blooming in her chest. She looked at the piano, the keys glowing under the lights. This grand instrument had opened a door she thought was long closed. She nodded gently. Without speaking, she lifted her hands once more. The room fell silent again, ready for whatever she wanted to share next. And in that silence, she began to play not just another song, but another piece of her soul. The next morning, the sun had only just begun to rise when she woke up, though she had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying everything from the night before, the crowd standing in silence, the applause that didn't seem to end, the look on people's faces when they realized she wasn't just a waitress. It all felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life for a brief, shining moment. But as she stood up and looked around her tiny room, she reminded herself that nothing had changed on the outside. The world was still the same. Her bills were still the same. Her apron still hung on the back of the chair. Yet something inside her had shifted. She quietly prepared for the day, washing her face, braiding her hair, and putting on the same shoes she wore every shift. But she carried a different kind of energy, now a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Not confidence exactly, but something close to hope. On her way to work, she kept replaying the sound of the piano keys under her fingers. She had played like she wasn't afraid, like all the walls she'd built inside herself had suddenly fallen away. She wondered if she could ever feel that free again. When she entered the hotel staff area, she expected everything to be normal. She expected someone to hand her a tray, or call her to clean a table, or remind her to be quick on her feet. But before she could even put her bag down, the event manager appeared at the door. He wasn't someone she normally interacted with. People like him usually spoke only to department heads, not to servers. But he was standing there, eyes fixed on her, as if she had been the person he came looking for. "There you are," he said, almost relieved. "Come with me. Someone wants to see you." She blinked, confused. "Me?" "Yes," he said quickly. "Please, right now." She followed him through the staff hallway, feeling a nervous flutter in her stomach. She kept reminding herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. If anything, she had done something good. But she still felt nervous old. Habits didn't disappear overnight. The manager led her to a private dining area where 3 people sat at a round table, all dressed in elegant clothes. She recognized one of them instantly, the man who had spoken last night, the one who had asked her to play again. He had been sitting near the front, watching her with a quiet, focused expression. The kind of expression someone gives only when they are deeply moved. He stood up as soon as she entered. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Thank you for coming." She looked around, unsure if she was supposed to sit or speak, or just wait. "Good morning," she said softly. "Please." He gestured to an empty chair. "Have a seat." She sat down slowly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't know why she had been called here, but the atmosphere felt serious in a good way, she hoped. The man leaned forward slightly. "Last night, your performance left all of us stunned. I don't say that lightly. When you began playing, everything changed in the room. People forgot their conversations. They forgot about the event. They listened to you. And that kind of power, you don't see it often." She felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know what to say, so she only nodded. One of the women at the table spoke next. "We'd like to know, do you have any training? Any performances? Any history with music?" She swallowed. "I used to play a lot when I was younger. I wanted to study it properly, but life moved in a different direction. I haven't played in a long time." "And what we heard last night," the woman asked, "that was you after years without practice?" "I play sometimes," she admitted, "late at night when no one is around. But I don't have formal performances or anything like that." The 3 exchanged a quick look, one that seemed to hold surprise and excitement. The man spoke again. "I'm going to be direct. We're organizing a series of charity events over the next few months. High-profile ones. We want to feature local talent, people who carry real emotion in their work. What you showed last night, that was raw, honest, moving. We'd like to offer you a chance to perform at the first event." She stared at him, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. "You want me to perform?" "Yes," he said simply. "Not as a waitress. As a pianist." Her heart thudded loudly. She had dreamed of something like this once a long time ago, but reality had pulled her so far away from that dream that she had almost forgotten it existed. "Are you sure?" She asked quietly. I don't know if I'm good enough for an event like that. The man smiled gently. You are good enough to silence a room full of people who don't usually stop talking. That's all the proof we need. She didn't know what moved her more, the offer itself, or the belief she heard in his voice. For so long, she had lived without anyone expecting anything from her, without anyone seeing anything in her except someone who served tables. She had become invisible in her own life. And now, suddenly, someone was telling her she had something worth sharing. What would I have to do? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. We'll arrange rehearsal times, the woman explained. You'll have access to a proper piano. We can provide guidance if you need it, or you can prepare on your own. Whatever you're comfortable with. And, the man added, you'll be paid as an artist. That part made her eyes widen. She had never been paid for her music before. She had only ever played because she loved it, because it made her feel alive. I need some time to think, she said honestly, though her heart was already leaning in one direction. Of course, the man said. Take a couple of days. But remember one thing, you don't get moments like last night by accident. Some people spend their whole lives searching for a sign. You were given one. Don't ignore it. She nodded slowly. After the meeting, she walked back through the hotel with her mind spinning. The other staff members stared at her curiously, whispering among themselves. Word had already spread. People were surprised, impressed. Confused, some of them, didn't know how to react to the idea that the quiet waitress had suddenly stepped into the spotlight. Her friend from the service team rushed toward her as soon as she entered the staff room. What's going on? Everyone's talking about you. She took a breath. They want me to play in a real event, like properly perform. Her friend's eyes widened. Are you serious? That's amazing. It is, she said softly. But it's scary too. Why scary? You were incredible last night. She hesitated before answering. Because what if last night was just luck? What if I can't do it again? What if it's too big for me? Her friend placed a hand on her shoulder. Listen, people don't get this kind of chance by mistake. And you didn't play like someone who got lucky. You played like someone who has lived through things and turned them into something beautiful. She looked down, absorbing those words. The rest of her shift passed slowly. She couldn't focus on carrying trays or refilling glasses. Her mind kept drifting to the piano, to the possibility of stepping on stage, not as a worker, but as an artist. It was overwhelming. It felt like a door she didn't know existed had suddenly opened right in front of her when she got home. She sat on her bed and closed her eyes, letting everything settle. The room was quiet, except for the faint sounds from the street outside. She thought about the younger version of herself, the one who used to stay up late practicing until her fingers hurt, the one who dreamed of playing for people who would actually listen, the one who believed music could change her life. Somewhere along the way, she had lost that version of herself. But maybe she wasn't fully gone. Maybe she had just been sleeping. She picked up her old notebook, the one where she used to write ideas for melodies and little notes about how she wanted her music to feel. The pages were worn, the writing faded, but it still felt like a piece of her. She flipped through it slowly, remembering things she had buried. For the first time in years, she opened the small keyboard she kept in her closet. It wasn't much, just a cheap one she had bought secondhand, but it still worked. She placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She just played. Soft notes filled the room, shaky at first, then smoother as her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. The music wrapped around her like a warm blanket, easing her fears, reminding her of who she was beneath all the layers of exhaustion and routine. She played for hours, losing track of time. When she finally stopped, her hands were trembling, Not from fear this time, but from emotion. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe she didn't feel strong enough. But she knew one thing for sure. She wanted to try Dot as she sat quietly in her room, with the last notes still echoing softly. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was courage. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was the start of a new chapter she had been waiting for, without even knowing it. She woke up before her alarm rang, long before the sun fully touched the sky. Her room was quiet, but her heart wasn't. It beat with a mix of nerves and excitement, the same way it had the first time she ever sat in front of a piano as a child. Today was the day of the charity event, the day she would perform not by accident, not as a background moment, but by choice. As an invited artist, she sat at the edge of her bed for a few minutes, letting the reality sink in. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. At least, not for today. Today she would step onto a stage where people actually came to listen. She placed her hand over her chest and took a slow breath. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. Her morning routine felt different. Same motions washing her face, tying back her hair, preparing something small to eat, but each moment carried a quiet strength. She moved like someone who was stepping out of one life and into another, even if it was only for a single day. She wasn't pretending to be anything new. She was simply returning to the person she had always been inside. Before leaving home, she opened her small keyboard and pressed a few keys. Not to practice, just to remind herself of the feeling of home, of the sound that had carried her through hard days and lonely nights. The notes were soft, but she felt them settle her nerves. The venue for the charity event was one of the most beautiful places in the city. When she reached the entrance, she felt the same flutter she had felt the night she first played in front of everyone. But this time, she walked through the doors with her shoulders a little straighter. The event manager greeted her with a warm smile. "You're early," he said, as if he was genuinely pleased. "I wanted to make sure I had enough time," she replied. He nodded. "Good. The rehearsal room's ready for you. There's a grand piano inside. Take your time with it." She followed him down a long hallway that opened into a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows. In the center stood a sleek black piano, polished so well it reflected the morning light. She had never played on something so perfect. When she placed her hands on the keys, it felt like touching the surface of calm water. The first note she played filled the room with a richness she had never heard before. It felt like the piano wasn't just responding to her touch, it was supporting her, lifting her, meeting her halfway. She practiced slowly at first, letting her fingers adjust to the weight of the keys. But soon she lost herself in the music. Every melody she had practiced at home came back stronger, fuller, brighter. She didn't rush. She didn't force anything. She simply played the way she felt. When she finally lifted her hands, she realized someone had been standing near the door. It was the man who had offered her this opportunity. He clapped softly. "You play with emotion," he said. "That is something no amount of training can teach." She felt a shy smile form. "I just try to play honestly. That's all anyone can ask," he said. "Are you ready for tonight?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I think I am." He approached the piano, resting his hand gently on the top. "Let me tell you something," he said. "When you played the other night, people didn't just hear music, they felt something. And that's rare. Don't forget that when you step on that stage tonight." His confidence in her felt like a steady light, guiding her through her doubts. The hours passed quickly as the event preparations continued. Staff set up tables, organizers arranged decorations, and musicians tested their sound equipment. She watched everything quietly, absorbing the energy of the place. This wasn't like the luxury event where she worked as a server. This felt more meaningful. This felt personal. As the evening approached, She went to the small room assigned to her as a dressing area. There was a simple outfit hanging there for her. Nothing too grand, but elegant enough to make her feel like she belonged. When she put it on and looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the reflection. Not because she looked different, but because she felt different. The soft knock on the door made her turn. "We're starting soon," the coordinator said. "Are you ready to take your place backstage?" She nodded, though her stomach tightened with nerves. Backstage, she listened as the event began. Voices filled the hall, speeches, introductions, light music from other performers. Her hands felt cold, so she rubbed them together gently. She looked down at her fingers, the same fingers that had washed dishes, carried trays, and scrubbed floors for years. And now they were about to touch a grand piano in front of people who came expecting something beautiful. The thought both frightened and warmed her. Finally, she heard her name being announced, not her full name, but just enough to introduce her as the evening's pianist. She took a quiet breath, then another. Her legs felt shaky, but she walked forward anyway. When the curtain opened, she stepped into a soft glow of stage lights. The crowd was large, far larger than she had expected. Faces turned toward her, curious, calm, waiting. She didn't see judgment, only expectation. The piano sat in the center of the stage, its surface shining under the lights. As she approached it, the hall grew even quieter. She sat down slowly. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears. She closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself. She remembered how music had saved her in small ways, how it had carried her through loneliness, how it had never abandoned her, even when life became heavy. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first note floated through the room like a soft breeze. She felt the audience shift, leaning in. She played with the same emotion she had discovered the night everything changed. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't look around. She didn't force anything. She let the music come from a place deep inside her as the melody built. She felt the familiar wave of emotion rise within her memories of her childhood. Moments she had lost, dreams she thought would never return. But instead of holding them back, she poured them into the music. Every rise, every fall, every pause carried a piece of her. People didn't move. They didn't cough or whisper or shift in their seats. They listened. When she reached the final note, she let it linger, hanging gently in the air like a feather floating downward. And dash silence. A long, full silence. And suddenly, applause. Loud, warm, alive. People stood, not all at once, but gradually, as if they needed a moment to process what they felt. She lifted her head, startled by the sight of so many people rising to their feet. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief, from gratitude, from believing, for the first time in years, that she mattered outside her daily routine. When she rose from the piano bench, she bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed. People kept clapping, some even cheering. She felt something inside her shift again, this time stronger, more steady. Backstage, the event manager approached her immediately, his face glowing with pride. That, he said, was something special. She could barely speak. "Thank you for giving me this chance." He shook his head gently. "No, you earned it." As the event continued, guests approached her with kind words, compliments, and encouragement. Some asked if she taught music. Others asked if she planned to perform again. A few even asked for her contact to invite her to future events. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, but she handled it with quiet grace. A part of her still felt like the server who cleared tables and refilled glasses. But another part, growing stronger by the minute, felt like a musician by the end of the night. When the hall emptied and the lights dimmed, she walked back to the piano one last time. She touched the keys softly, as if thanking them. Outside, the cool night air felt fresh against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from a feeling she couldn't describe. She walked home slowly, letting everything settle. With every step, she carried not just memories of the performance, but a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. When she reached her room, she didn't turn on the light. She sat on her bed and let the quiet surround her. For a long time, she stayed still, taking everything in. Then she opened her notebook again, the one filled with old melodies and dreams. She turned to a blank page and wrote something simple. This is only the beginning. And she believed it. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel small or stuck or unseen. She felt like someone who had found her voice again, someone who had stepped out of the shadows, someone who had something to offer the world. She lay down slowly, and before she closed her eyes, she whispered to herself, "You did it." And this time, she believed that too.